This week our topic for Jump Right In is personality, and personality is the topic you'll be exploring in Chapter 12. I had a professor one time who said that personality is probably uh, the most or next to the most important topic to study in the field of psychology because that's what we're dealing with, particularly when you're talking about clinical psychology. That is to say, when clients and or patients come into the therapy room to talk to the therapist to get treatment for life adjustments or psychological disorders. So there are a couple of definitions of personality. You already have a gut instinct for what personality is and what your personality is like. We can lump it together by saying it's your distinctive, stable way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So let's take a look at some of the theories, and I'm going to debunk a couple of them for you, as well as let you know which one or ones I think have the most credibility in the field. Okay, so research has told us all along that our personalities are pretty stable. We're establishing our personalities, from the moment we're born. In fact, we may go so far as to say that an infant comes out of the womb with a degree of temperament, and temperament probably has something to do with the development of a personality, wouldn't you think? So basically, if you have certain traits of your personality at this point in time, more than likely, if I got to know you pretty well and I touched base with you, when I was 130 years old and you were 60, I would see some evidence of those traits then. So this leads us to be able to say that there is some degree in stability in personality. In other words, it doesn't change overwhelmingly. Now, with that said, that's not to say that certain situations can occur that won't cause you to resort to other personality dimensions or traits which serve you in a situation. And the biggest point I can think of is that there are a number of you out there who are introverts like me. In fact, I think colleges attract a lot of introverts. And so essentially, you may be going into a job field which requires you to put yourself out there a little bit more. You're not going to be that wallflower when you have to speak at a committee meeting, or at least not after you get used to it. So basically, you're reaching into your little grab bag of personality traits that are not really yours and using them. And after a while, you get pretty comfortable with it. So if you have to be a bit of an extrovert, even when you're an introvert, in order to survive or to make money or what have you, then you can do it. Okay, so always with psychological concepts and theories, we take a look at the nature versus nurture deal, and personality is one of those that functions on that 50-50 basis. In other words, our genes, what we inherited along our family tree, comprise about 50% of what we can expect to be as far as personality is concerned, and about 50% is determined by the experience that bombard us throughout our lives. Now I'm going to start and probably spend the longest on Freud, and maybe this doesn't make sense. Freud is fun to talk about because I'm going to debunk Freud's theories for the most part, but he's fun to talk about because he has some outrageous ideas, as I think we may have mentioned before. Freud really doesn't or didn't come up with or come by his theories and concepts in a lab. He was a wonderful psychological and philosophical thinker, but his theories do not rest on science, right? It was more art than that. Okay, so one of the things that kind of directs his personality theory is misogyny. Do keep in mind that he practiced during what's called the Victorian era, and if you look at that picture of these three women on a bicycle, who the hell rides a bicycle like that with long dresses and hats and so forth? I mean, it's enough to have that reptilian brain of yours helping you control the bicycle. Now you got to make sure that your hat stays on and that your skirt doesn't get in the way. what garbage, right? Well, women were expected to keep their heads covered. We're not expected to show a lot of nether region flesh like thighs and knees and even calves and ankles, right? So Freud's theories are to a degree based on the era in which he lived. Okay, this was a time of tremendous male dominance and also of a lot of sexual repression. Even though I'm using a term that I'm about to debunk in just a moment. And of course, Freud spends a lot of time on the unconscious. Now, I'm not saying there is no unconscious. Okay, once again, I'm not saying there is no unconscious. I believe there is. But Freud gives a little bit too much credit to these underlying and undergirding motives and thoughts and feelings that are there in our unconscious, and he thought we need to make them gurgle up to the surface in order to deal with them. Okay, so his part of his definition, his operationalized definition, is that our unconscious it holds on to unacceptable thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories. And what he was interested in is taking a close look at those that seep out. Okay, Freud proposed that there is a structure to our personality, and he focused a lot on conflict. So the structure is formulated based on conflict in our consciousness, right, and unconscious. Okay, so we try to do things in our lives, he said, to bring satisfaction in our lives without feeling guilt or getting punished for it. So he says there are three structures. All right, if you think about this in terms of an iceberg, then the superego and the ego kind of function above the surface of the water, whereas the id is down below. So the id, keep in mind, is that dark part of the personality in the sense that it's a drive. It's sort of like the devil. You see that middle picture there with the devil on your shoulder, on one shoulder, and an angel on the other side. So the id has to do with the instinctive things you want to do. And it's all based, Freud says, on this idea of the pleasure principle of getting instant gratification. But then we have something, as you know from studying Kohlberg, called morality or moral standards. And so we have the superego who said, whoa, 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 you can't just do whatever the id tells you to do, for heaven's sake. You have got to think about values, people getting along together well, and what is the human way to do things. Okay, so that's your superego, or the voice of your conscious. The ego is kind of in the middle of those two things, right? It operates on the reality principle. If you're starving to death and you're in a supermarket, your id may tell you, do it, do it, do it. And your superego is telling you it's wrong, wrong, wrong. Your ego would say, you really need to steal that eggplant because you're starving to death. You may not survive to tomorrow morning if you don't have something to eat. Take it. Okay? So the ego does this little balancing act between the two, right? So it helps the satisfy the id's impulses in a beneficial way rather than a destructive way. If you only listen to the id, you'd be doing very self-destructive stuff. And then he comes up with my favorite part, and that's the psycho stages of personality development. And this is really all bullshit. Okay? So, first of all, the whole assumption is that your personality is all done by the time you reach puberty. You don't really... Dr. Freud, you don't think that there are some things that are going on during puberty and maybe even thereafter that doesn't have an impact on your personality development? Because I think there are things, right? So he says that during the first 3 months of life, the first 18 months of life, we are really focused on this idea of sucking, biting, chewing. I mean, if you put a finger, close to a baby's mouth, that baby is going to immediately turn and want to take, your finger in its mouth, right? So that's the oral stage, psychosexual stage of development. It centers on the mouth. And so basically Freud would say if you had a problem like biting your fingernails, or you smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day, he might say you were fixated in the oral stage of development. Then there's the anal stage that goes on between 18 and 36 months. Why is this? Why do we label it that way? Because during this period of time, you're really working hard on mastering those bathroom techniques. You no longer have to have mom or dad to go in the bathroom with you, or at least you're working toward this, to help you eliminate and to clean up after elimination. And so this all has to do with control, because if you can think back that far, and I'm not sure you can because memory doesn't work too well after the age of 3, but if you could think back that far, you'd probably realize a great sense of satisfaction once you were able, to pee on your own, to defecate on your own, and to clean yourself up. So you are in control. So Freud might say that if you just acted impulsively in your life, for example, you just couldn't help being a bully, for example, because you had to be in control of the people around you and the situations around you, that you were trapped in the anal stage of development. And then he moves into the phallic stage, 3 to 6 years old, where the focus is on the genitals. Now you're thinking, that doesn't make any sense, because a lot of students confuse the phallic with the genital stages, and they don't have the same conflicts to deal with. So in the phallic stage, this is when you are coping with one idea, and he only counted males in this, right? So Freud says the Oedipal complex kicks in, and this is when the male child is in competition with his father for the attention of the mother. Well, already you're probably thinking of some problems with that particular theory, not even counting the fact that we're leaving out more than 50% of the population who are female, right? And so basically he came up with this whole idea of the Oedipus complex from a play, a Greek tragedy called Oedipus Rex, right? Where Oedipus, I won't tell the story, you can look it up in your mythology book, and you probably already know it anyway, where Oedipus, was his parents sort of abandoned him, turned him over to a shepherd because the soothsayer had told them that he was going to grow up to murder his father and marry his mother, and indeed that happened because coincidence and fate made it so that when he came back into town where his mother and father were king and queen, he was given the throne. Prior to that, he had actually killed his father on the way to the city of Thebes. So unknowingly, he became his mother's husband. Okay, so this is the phallic stage. Well, we're leaving women out, right? And we'll talk about that shortly. So if you're going to become healthy as a sexual individual, then you got to make it through this phallic stage, okay? In other words, you've got to go through that feeling of competing with dad for the attention of the mom, and after a while you get to the other side, and you as a male child become an ally with dad, and you are no longer competing with dad, right? Then we go into latency where nothing's happening. Okay, that's all that means. 6 years until you hit puberty. Then with puberty, your sexual interests are maturing, and he felt that this is when personality development essentially ended with mature sexual relationships. But Freud was, he kind of focused on sex a lot in many of his theories. So that's one of the reasons he's kind of stopped there. Now, Freud also came up with personality development defense mechanisms. And those are techniques that our ego uses to manage conflict between the id and the superego. There's a wonderful example on YouTube of a video, music video with the Frozen theme song that takes a look at all of the defense mechanisms that are being used by Elsa, right, when she sort of puts herself into exile, right? So many of this list of defense mechanisms she accesses in dealing with her feelings, right? Now here's the deal. You will notice that there are a lot of defense mechanisms on my little chart here that are in red. That means that our research has indicated that those are not really valid. I mean, some people, might, but this is not a universal experience by any means as far as individuals are concerned. Regression, for example, regression makes it sounds like, you bury something. No, I'm sorry, repression, not regression, but repression. You hide certain impulses that you don't want to be aware of. But we found out that repression, maybe we wish repression would work more than it does. Just ask an individual who's gone through a horrible trauma in their lives if they've repressed those horrible memories, and they're more than likely to say, no, but I wish I could, right? But the two that we have found that have some water, so we can hand these to Freud as winners, right, are projection. In other words, you project your impulses onto others so it appears they have it rather than you. I can give you a good example in your romantic relationships. If you are a highly jealous individual who is also highly sexual, and you are very much tempted to, play the field a bit, even though you're allegedly have committed to your partner, then basically, but when your partner's around, you're always accusing them of looking at somebody else that maybe they think looks more attractive than you. You're jealous as hell. So you're projecting the fact that you can't be trusted onto the spouse or the partner, maybe who can. So that has some validity. Reaction formation, I can explain that. We overreact against the id by doing the exact opposite. And I can give you one from elementary school that you probably either have done or have had done. So there is a time when, probably within the first or second or third grade, when this may happen. It may even go on a little bit older than that, but not much more. When you feel a lot of affection. Maybe you're a boy and you're feeling a lot of affection to another little girl in your second grade class, but you don't want anybody to know that. But you got to make sure that you bring yourself, you got to you do you and bring yourself to the attention of that little girl. So what do? You pass by her desk and she's got her books all piled up on her desktop, and you get your elbow and sweep the books off the desk. Well, that gets you a lot of attention from the rest of the class, and also her, who is the source of the attention you want. So that is a reaction formation. You're doing exactly the opposite of what you're feeling inclined to do. Okay. So now we go to the neo-freudians. And Adler, he is the inventor of the inferiority complex, and you really don't need that defined, right? But I do want to focus on Karen Horney. You can pronounce it Horny because it's more fun to do that, I know. But actually, she pronounced her last name, and her family did, as Horney. So Karen Horney, who is a neo-Freudian, that means new Freudian, right, who took Freud on and said, you're full of bullshit with this psychosexual stuff, dude. Because Freud had also, I neglected to mention this, had gone so far as to say that one of the problems with women, because they have neurosis so often, they're hysterical. One of their problems is that they have penis envy. And so she's like, no. Because basically, if you say that, then we've got to look at the other side of the coin. If women have penis envy, then the males probably are suffering from womb envy, because they will never have the experience of giving birth to a child and feeling that flood of oxytocin overwhelm them when the child is born, right? So Horney got him on a lot of sexist points. So she came up with what she called the Electra complex, and I'm not sure, which is basically just the opposite of the Oedipus complex. A girl is in competition with the mother for the attention of the dad, and to be healthy, she has to come off unscathed on the other side of that conflict. And she also says, females emphasize the importance of relationships more than males do. Okay, so I think this is kind of where we leave the psychodynamic personality theories with the neo-Freudians and the Freudians. This slide sort of tells you, I think, some of the weaknesses of Freud's theories, if you want to take a closer look at that slide. I don't think I cover anything there on your quiz, though. Okay, then we had humanistic theories. Humanistic psychology actually is a precursor to something we call positive psychology. Positive psychology is the idea of psychology is a tool that can be used not only by people who have psychological disorders or adjustment disorders, but it can also be a tool for those of us who don't, because there are a lot of good things that we get from psychology, right? So the guy, and I'm a humanist existentialist, right? Because I believe that life has no purpose. Okay? That's going to bother some of you when I stop there, but that's not where I stop. My idea is this: life has no purpose except that which the individual gives their life, right? So that's kind of the clincher. And I think most humanists probably feel that way. It's very much person-centered. All right? Now, we don't think it's okay just because you feel like killing somebody or hurting them or stealing from them that all that's okay. Of course not. But we do put a lot of emphasis on the individual. And Carl Rogers deserves the credit for this, right? He really does. Because he came up with a person-centered perspective that grew into a kind of therapy. And he came up with some theories about how you do therapy well. And he thought that it's very important in our relationship with each other and in our relationship as shrinks in the therapy room that we are genuine, okay? That we provide unconditional positive regard, that you don't have to behave or be a certain way for me to feel like you have value as a human being is what that means. And being empathic or empathetic. In other words, I'm able to put myself in your shoes, right? So these theories from the humanist perspective were in direct opposition to Freud's theories. Okay, they also dealt a lot with self-concept, and that's another term that you've heard a lot, and you've probably used it before. So, we break the self-concept into positive self-concept and negative concept. You know what that means. If you have a positive self-concept, you have a firm handle on who you are, and you also have a positive point of view or perspective on the world. Negative concept, you're unhappy or dissatisfied. Your life does not feel very, very satisfying at all. Okay? Humanists, by the way, for those of you in the learning chapter who said that one of the best things that the school can do is get the standardized test out of them, humanists don't really believe in standardized testing either, by the way. They feel it's depersonalizing. Okay. More on humanists. They also came up with the term self-actualization, and what that means, really, I mean, you can come up with a fancy definition if you like, but what that means is it's a slogan from one of the branches of the military several decades ago: be all that you can be. If you're self-actualized, we can never be perfect. We can never achieve everything we want to, but we can work toward achieving what we really want to achieve in its totality. And so there comes a point when we feel as though we are self-actualized. You become the person you have the potential to be. There's something that clicks in the brain that you have become that one, right? Okay, so incongruence and congruence are terms that are important to self-actualization and to humanists, right? So congruence is the healthy term here, because congruence simply means that what you wanted to become, to be self-actualized, matches what your real self is, what you are now, right? Okay, so that's congruence. You've made congruent, or you've harmonized that goal of what you want to be with who you are now. Incongruence means that you've never been able to match your real self with the ideal self, as you see at the bottom of that particular slide. Okay? So, if you're incongruent, you are more likely to be subjected to mental illness and to unhappiness in your life. Okay, then we get into behavioral theories. Bogus, okay? I'm not saying behavioralism is bogus, but I am saying behaviors should have kept their hands off personality. Why? Because for one thing, they said there's no such thing. They said personality is just an artifact of forces that bombard us and our brains and our bodies, and we're just responding to stimuli in our environment. And if we behave a certain way, right, it's because of outside forces it causes. If you're an introvert, that's not personality. That's because there are a bunch of stuff that happened to you that made you an introvert, right? That's the way they would look at it. And I am so sorry, but, while to some degree what they say is true, to a larger degree what they say is not. They also totally denied this whole idea of free will. I'm not sure where I stand on that right now, so I might, maybe by the time I'm, reach the point where I have to say goodbye to my mortal existence, maybe I will say, okay, the behaviors were right, there is no free will, or maybe I will think that there was when I look back on my life. I mean, I haven't reached that point in my life review yet. Okay. Trait theories, this is where we are now. Let me repeat. Trait theories is where we are now. We find conceptualizing personality with human organisms to work best when we take a look at personality traits. Thank you, Gordon Allport, because he was the guy, the shrink, who says, let me get a team of my students at the university to look through dictionaries and come up with trait-related words. They found 18,000. Well, obviously, that's too many. I mean, that's way too unwieldy for psychology to deal with that. So the whole idea behind Allport's theory is that personality is stable, and it is a pattern, an enduring pattern of behaviors that we resort to. And we can find those through traits. Well, after a lot of culling through those 18,000 trait-related words, we came up with what we call the 5-factor model. And I want you to remember the word, and of course you'll need to know how to spell it, ocean. O-C-E-A-N. Ocean. Yes, that refers to that big body, or those big bodies of water, but the word ocean also is an acronym for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. You're going to be taking a personality test this week in which you are seeing it where you are the strongest in terms of those 5 traits. Okay? So, once again, the 5-factor model, the test you're taking is called the Big 5 Inventory. And those traits, believe it or not, will, to probably a validity of about, probably to a validity of about 95%, predict the way you're likely to behave in a lot of situations. So here we go. The traits haven't been listed on this chart in the correct order, but here you notice that when we score that test you'll be taking, you're going to have 5 different scores. So if you come up with one score, you're going to lose your points on that burning question. So you got 5 different scores. By the way, I put the instructions on the burning question, so you should be okay. Okay, so basically, if you're going to have a score on neuroticism. This is the only one where the high score is construed negatively. Because if you score high on neuroticism, you have a tendency to think negatively. You have a tendency to be sad, to be anxious. Whereas if you have a low score on neuroticism, and I'll tell you what low, medium, and high scores are on the burning question too, a low score means you have a lot of emotional stability. The others, though, the highs, mean that you're endorsing what those terms mean. So you know about extroversion, conscientiousness. Some of you may have a messy room and score high on conscientiousness, and it's because of the fact that I could say, wow, that room is messy. Where's your textbook? And where's your biology textbook? You say, oh, it's right over there, under that stack of clothes. So you know where everything is, even though it's messy. So you can still score high on conscientiousness, even if you have a messy room, because I used to use that as a way to have students assess in their own minds whether they were conscientious or not. Okay, so you see openness is the O in ocean, conscientiousness is the C, E is extroversion, A is agreeableness, and N is neuroticism. Make sure that you distinguish clearly between openness and agreeableness. Openness means openness to experience. It's not open to new relationships. It's actually openness to adventure. And not necessarily to physical adventure like climbing Mount Everest. It's open to new ideas, right? Agreeableness, on the other hand, that's when you are likely to be construed, if you score high on this, where you're likely to be construed as very approachable. You smile a lot. You're easy to get along with. You're sympathetic to other people. Those kinds of things. Okay. All right, so when we evaluate this particular theory, we see that these traits stabilize as we grow older. Do keep in mind, as I've alluded to earlier, but I didn't put it quite this succinctly, is that your personality does not necessarily predict how you're going to behave in every situation. I mean, you might flip somebody off, in a fit of road rage while you're traveling down Highway 27, right? And but you're usually a laid-back, easygoing, agreeable person, right? But you just lost your shit that time. Okay, so that's kind of an exception to the way you generally are. Okay, let's see. Now we move into social cognitive theories of personality, which to me seems a lot like humanistic theories, so I'm not dwelling on this a whole heck of a lot. You do need to know about self-efficacy, though. If you look at this little boy who's out there on that softball field, you can look at him and you see the determination in his face and his stance, and you can say, yeah, that's a self-efficacious little dude, right? And those of you who are probably the highest performing students are those who feel self-efficacious. It's like, yeah, this is a challenge. Yeah, this shit is hard, but I can do it, right? That's what self-efficacy is. Your expectations, whether or not you're going to succeed. And if you score low on an assessment of self-efficacy, then success in a number of domains may be difficult for you. Okay, then let's see. Anything here? I probably need to get off this slide because some of you are very frightened of clowns. Let's see. The thing that I shouldn't call it nice, but one thing I do kind of agree with is that from social cognitive theory is that sometimes we create situations to which we react, and sometimes we react badly to them. Because basically, if you have this expectation that people are going to think you suck as a person or as a friend or as somebody to get to know, then you're probably going to be a little bit desperate to make friends with other people. And that desperation may come through and just have the opposite effect of what you intended, because people are going to be a little standoffish and aloof and maybe not want to get as involved with you because they're afraid you might just be too much of a project for them. Okay, locus of control. You've heard of this before. Note that we abbreviated LOC. Julian Rotter came up with this particular theory. Locus of control has to do with your belief about how much control you have over the situations that pop up in your life. Your internal locus of control means that you have control of the forces inside of yourself, right? You don't need the acclaim. You don't need the trophy. You don't need the praise. You don't need either of those things like somebody with an external locus of control. You think, so basically it's like, when I do something good, I want that gold star on that test I made an A on. I want the trophy for being the best athlete, Now, trophies are going to be nice whether you have an internal LOC or an external LOC. But the thing about it, did you get that trophy because the trophy was what you were trying to achieve? Or did you get that trophy because of something inside, which is, I want to strive and be my best in track and field, right? Okay, and self is the organizer of our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And so the thing here has more to do with the spotlight effect. One of the challenges that I can't do online that I do with my students face-to-face is I play a music video of Barry Manilow, which is big-time pop, rock, and disco, right? And so I tell them that I pass a sheet around saying, if you put your name and the size of T-shirt you want to order, I will get that picture you see to Barry Manilow to the left with that glittery frou-frou blouse on, right? And that'll be on the front of your T-shirt, and on the back it'll say, I heart Barry Manilow on it. And most people say, oh, hell no, I don't care if it is free. I don't want it. That's because they're afraid of the spotlight effect, because I also tell them, you got to wear that T-shirt when you leave my class. And they're like, oh, don't waste your money, Professor Hazel. I don't want that stupid T-shirt, okay? I don't even know who Barry Manilow is, or I don't like his music. So spotlight effect means that you you either gravitate towards situations that are going to put you in the spotlight or in the middle of the actions, or you gravitate in the opposite direction because you don't want that spotlight on you, right? Okay, so self-esteem, and we've talked a little bit about that before, I think, so I don't know that we need to go into that, except that there is a difference between defensive and secure self-esteem. If you have defensive self-esteem, basically you do everything you can to make any failures or criticism less threatening. Maybe you don't even put yourself out there because you're afraid of being criticized, so that's defensive. I've got to protect myself, right? That's what defensive means. Secure self-esteem, I am happy with myself, I am proud of myself, and I'm going to put myself out there, and if I fail, so what? There'll be other opportunities to succeed. And, if you criticize me because of my views or because I fail, I don't care, because I know who I am, and what you say makes no never mind to me. Now, in closing, we get into individualistic versus collectivistic. We've talked about that in terms of multiculturalism, because we can have either one of those types of cultures, but we can also adopt those as people too. So that becomes part of a part of our personality, right? So we have to decide: do we lean on the side of independence or interdependence? Independence is like you are pretty much self-focused. It doesn't mean you're a jerk to other people, but it means you're guided kind of by your own on regard of what it is you want to do. Interdependence, and by the way, that would be more individualistic individuals, right? More collectivistic individuals are interdependent. This is not the same thing as dependent. You got to keep that distinction in mind. An interdependent or collectivistic individual may have a strong self-esteem, positive self-esteem. That may very well be true, but the deal is they also put more emphasis on making sure that they as an individual do not do anything that might be embarrassing to the group or groups to which they belong either. So they depend on themselves and they depend on each other. Now, we have found out that since 2012, high school and college students report in assessments lower concern for others than ever before. So it seems as though humanity might be evolving away from interdependence and more toward independence. Okay, so does that mean living in an individualistic society like the United States, that we're doomed to loneliness and to always be just inside our own heads and instead of trying to get inside other people's heads? Not necessarily, because we do put ourselves in collectivistic groups and situations. I mean, these individuals are probably celebrating a game they feel good about, right? So they're at Subway enjoying a hoagie, right? And they work together in order to achieve whatever it was that they achieved. So it's not, yes, they were interested in their own individual success and performance, but they were also doing it not only for themselves, but also for each other and whatever the organization was that they represented. So collectivists, we see, are more closely tied to their family, to their groups, and to their friends. Okay, and that's it. So sorry, went a little bit longer than a half hour. If you have any questions, let me know. Have a great week.